Hi, good afternoon. I am Dr. Denise Morales, and with me today is Dr. Sharice Savell. We are members of the Planning Committee of the Social Work and Law Symposium, and we are delighted this afternoon to be talking with Martin Cirkiel, who is the keynote speaker for this year's conference. And so welcome, welcome, Marty. We are so happy that you're here joining us.
Well, thank you for this opportunity. It's quite an honor. You know, I have this joke that I'm living example of the fact that the older you get, anybody can get respectable. So I think you having me do this is kind of a kind of hits a nail on the head there, making me feel respectable after all these many years. And once again, talking to a group of kindred social workers and kindred spirits in social work advocacy is really important, something I really love.
How long have you been practicing social work in the law?
Well, I kind of need to go back almost a little bit before that. Quite frankly, one of the things we'll do Thursday, since we're talking to a large extent about a life's journey, is what I did almost before I was a social worker. And going out of my own youth and adolescence and young adulthood with, experimentation with drugs and other things, and I stopped doing that. And I ended up getting licensed in drug and alcohol abuse counseling in Missouri in the early 1970s, right? 50 years ago, quite a long time ago. And believe it or not, one of the things I did when I got that license was started working in prisons and doing drug and alcohol abuse counseling and relaxation groups and those kind of things in prisons. And I actually had a contract with the federal penitentiary in Leavenworth for 5 years doing groups there, which is kind of interesting. And then in the early 1980s, my wife, who's from Austin, we decided to move back to the Austin area, and I went to UT Social Work School, and I got my master's degree. And that was really inspiring because at the time I had played with getting a law degree and a social work degree, and UT did not have that, if you recollect. Now they do, which is really inspiring. So at the time I went to social work school, continued working in the Austin Travis County Alcohol Counseling Services while I was at school, and of course did a couple of internships, and then graduated in May of 1983 and started my social work career.
And so when did you start practicing law?
So in 1989, my father-in-law, well, it was actually a little bit before then, but my father-in-law inspired me to go to law school. I was 39 years old. And at that point, married, had 2 kids, a 13-year-old and a 9-year-old. And my father-in-law inspired me to go to school. And, one of the things we want to talk about it on the next day is people who inspired us. And he was one of those people. He was one of those guys that actually walked to school barefoot in the snow when he was younger. So when he inspired me to do something, it really meant a lot. So I went to law school. I went to St. Mary's, and I graduated there in 1992, and I've been practicing since. But one of the things I've kept over the last 30, 40 years is my social work licensure and certification. It's always been important to me. I've always re-upped it. I've always kept it on my letterhead. I always say, Master Social Worker in Science. And I think it's really important for myself of being a advocate to maintain that social work perspective advocacy. One of the things that first hit me, in fact, when I became an attorney, was I was able to say I was a attorney and counselor at law. And that really inspired me that I was able to maintain that counselor part of my social work being while I was becoming an attorney as well.
Well, so tell me a little bit more about that. How has your background in social work shaped your law practice?
It's really interesting. Back when I went to law school and got out, there was a few social workers that had become attorneys, and almost all of them went into family law. And I kind of fully expected that to happen as well. But sometimes life does things to us that we don't choose. And when I had worked for the state behavioral health center back then, where I know you from, I had some friends. And when I graduated law school, they called me up and said, "We need a job. We need an attorney to fill a position doing interviewing and investigation into private psychiatric hospitals for patient abuse and fraud." So in the 1990s, I started doing that and worked for the state and worked with the Texas Attorney General's office and the Consumer Protection Division, and ultimately even the FBI looking at the healthcare fraud. So that kind of took me in a different direction than family law, quite frankly. And eventually I kind of worked for some other attorneys doing civil practice and civil litigation in that field. And eventually, about mid 90s, I opened up my own practice. And, as I say, the rest is history. I was able to develop a practice dealing with disability discrimination, working with child protective services appointments, guardianship appointments, juvenile law appointments. I didn't do a lot of adult criminal law appointments, but to use the terminology of the time, I dealt with a lot of mentally ill offenders and cognitively impaired offenders. The judges knew me; they knew my social work background, and they always gave me appointments in that world. So I was able to develop that part of my practice and interest. Um, and then also, I had a friend that also worked with me in the community mental health center, a fellow named David Benke, who got involved doing special education work. And over the course of time, we've developed a really large practice of special education and Section 504 accommodation representation for kids and families all across the state. So we're probably the biggest law firm in Texas that deals with disability rights issues for children and adults.
Wow. Well, and you mentioned in your response that you previously knew me, so I just want to say for the folks listening that you were my very first field instructor, and therefore have had a huge imprint on my social work career. And you mentioned cognitive disabilities, particularly in that area, because you had me working in that area under you, and that soon became one of my career paths, one of the things that I did for almost 10 years as a result of that. So thank you. So we're doing this interview because on Thursday, September the 28th, you are going to be the keynote speaker at the Social Work and Law, Second Annual Social Work and Law National Symposium. And we're very excited about that. I'm wondering if you can give us a little sneak preview of what we might hear.
Well, I think probably talking a little bit more about what we already have spoken about in the last few minutes, a little bit about my background, my history, a little bit more specificity about some of the interests I picked up along the way, and how social work values and practice has become a really important part of it, and morals involved with social workers on the social work practice continue with me throughout the day. I have a heavy, heavy imprint on what we do in our firm and myself individually. I'll probably talk about a couple of cases along the way that we've handled that I think are very important. I have a case now that I'll be talking about that frankly has to do with it's a juvenile law case. And believe it or not, it had to do with a little 10-year-old boy with some behavioral issues that got in trouble in school and got sent to the local juvenile justice facility for touching a school teacher. They call it assault on a felony, assault on a public servant, felony assault on a public servant. And while he was there, and they transferred him and the other kids over to the juvenile detention center, they were all shackled and handcuffed, believe it or not. And worse yet, when they're in the courtroom, they would continue to be shackled. Right? So we have this 10-year-old kid in court with his mother and his lawyer and all the juvenile probation officers and all these people shackled. So believe it or not, that's not unconstitutional. So we have a case now that we're addressing in court. that we're hoping will be heard that deals with that issue, and we hope it becomes unconstitutional. I kind of consider it the most important case of my entire life, to be honest with you, because the effects will be not just here in Texas or in the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals, but arguably across the United States. So I'm kind of excited about it, and I
Yeah.
hope we win.
Yeah. Definitely. Well, that sounds exciting. I'm going to have the pleasure of hosting your session, so I'm going to get to hear all of it, and I really just can't wait. And then you're going to have a second session. It sounds like possibly on Friday. That might be a smaller group chat. So I'm looking forward to hearing from you. I think it's going to be a great presentation and something that folks must see. Is there anything else you want to add before we end this?
No, but just, thanks to yourself and Therese and all the other wonderful people that have made this happen. It's really an honor and a blessing to be part of it. I appreciate it.
Thank you.